Hello, this is What's All About with another watch review, and in this review we're looking at the very latest offering from the Polish brand Gerlach. Now this model is called the Submarine. In essence, it's the same case as their second from last release, the Enigma, but it comes in a brass case rather than a stainless steel case. Obviously, because it's submarine, you can sort of assume and tell that it's a diving watch. So let's go through some specs. It will cost you 1,499 Polish zloty, and that equals to around 285 British pounds. Talking about the size dimensions of the case, certainly not particularly small, 43mm in diameter. It has a height to the top of the domed crystal of 14.5mm, and then a lug to lug length of 49mm. So if I just put it on my 7.25 inch wrist, you'll be able to see how it looks. With all modern dive watches, obviously 43mm in diameter isn't out of this world. In fact, a lot of them are around the 42mm mark. So in terms of the size, for me, I'm not particularly against it, 43mm, but some people may think that it's a little bit too large. I probably wouldn't say that it's a kind of watch you could wear smartly dressed, mainly because of the rustic appearance of it. Obviously the brass case develops a pretty heavy patina in time, and the height of it as well. So it's more of a chunky, everyday kind of watch. The weight is 125 grams, so you can really feel that it's a decent quality product, well made. All thanks mainly, most likely, to the brass case. The crystal is double domed, so you can see here that we have a dome on the top, but we also have a dome on the underside. Because if you only have a dome on the top and it's flat on the underside, when you reach angles like this, it becomes almost unreadable. But the dome underneath counteracts the top dome, so you can see even at this angle, the dial is completely readable. Has an anti-reflective coating on the underside. Because of the high dome, it's actually quite reflective. In normal day-to-day life, it's not really an issue. You can still read it perfectly fine. But when you're trying to take pictures, it's a bit of a pain. And also when you're, obviously I'm taking a video here, and you can see the reflections quite obviously as well. But in day-to-day life, it doesn't really matter too much, and it gives quite a nice blue flash as well. So it's pretty clear. The clarity is good, but it doesn't remove all reflections. Lug width is 22mm, and the strap is 22mm for the whole length as well. And so we have a matching 22mm buckle, but we'll discuss that a little bit in more detail later on. And then movement wise, we have a Seiko NH35A. You can't see it, unfortunately, but that's the same kind of movement that has been used a lot in micro brands recently. So Gerlach's own Urgel, should I say, uses this movement. It's used in the Melbourne Watch Co Parkville, the Gruppo Gamma A41, and also the Invicta Pro Diver, to name just a few. So it is a very popular movement in these micro brands. Thinking about some of the specs for that, it runs at 21.6 thousand beats an hour, so it's 6 ticks a second. Has 24 joules, hand wind capabilities and hacking second hand, and it winds in both directions as well, so it's quite fast to wind up. So that's the movement, and so you can see here, I'm hand winding it there, and then pull it out, and we have the hacking second hands. Movement, water resistance is 100 meters. So although I probably wouldn't go underwater with the leather strap on, you certainly could take the watch itself and go for a nice swim. Okay, so let's have a look at piece by piece. So starting off with the case. So as I mentioned before, we have a brass case. It's fairly weighty, decent size as well. If you can sort of see, we have it's all brushed finish, but I've had this probably for 4 weeks, so about a month, and you can already see the patina developing quite nicely. If you did want to remove it, there are certain processes you can do to clean it out completely. I think one of them is just leave it in lemon juice for a little while, and it completely cleans it, makes it all sparkly, good as new. I quite like it. It's quite rustic though, a bit different. It really catches people's eye when they see this interesting material on your wrist, which isn't stainless steel or rose gold. I mean, everything seems to be pretty well machined. Really, you can't go wrong. It's the same shape as the Enigma, which was also very well machined. It's like a pillow shape, which is quite an interesting, slightly unusual shape, but I think it suits it quite well. We have a screw-in crown, and the sticker that comes on the end of the crown is an absolute nightmare to get off. So I ended up having to it was that hard. I had to scrape it off with, I can't remember what it was, like a tip of a tool or something like that. So I think I may have scratched it a little bit, but because of the style of the watch, it's quite good, because if you ding it or if you scratch it or anything like that, it's the kind of watch that it actually looks like it's supposed to be there. So not necessarily an issue. The logo is it's sort of like a light laser etching, which it would have been nice to see it deeply engraved like it is on the buckle though. You can see, if I get that in focus, you can see there, it's much nicer there. Okay, so that's the crown. Case back is steel, and it's stainless steel, because if it was brass then they would probably fuse together the case back to the case itself, so hence why it's a different material. We have a nice little image of a submarine as well, and some very specifics around the outside. This is nicely executed, decent engraving, and good detail to it as well. So the bezel, a little bit stiff, and it doesn't sound too good. As far as I am concerned, Gerlach never really have very nice bezel action. On all of the watches I've ever had from them, the bezel action has been pretty, not necessarily poor, but not particularly silky smooth, or that smooth at all. It makes a decent sound, but it just feels a little bit, not necessarily loose, it's tight. It just feels like it's grinding a bit too much when you're rotating it. So we have this brown insert which matches the strap and dial nicely. So that's quite a nice design to it. I do like that, and that's the insert. All the printing is nice and neat as well. Okay, so moving on to the dial. So we have it's quite a good amount of finishing to it. The dial itself, that is. We have this bobbly texture in the centre, but also right around the outer edge as well, and then this ring which is a little bit raised against those two bobbly textures. So you have a nice little sense of depth, sense of texture to the dial as well, which I always really like to see, rather than just a plain flat base dial. Within this outer ring we have really nice applied hour markers as well. You can see how thick they are. You can see that it's probably about 1/2 mil thick, which is really impressive on a watch costing this much. Usually they're quite thin, quite cheap, but you can tell here that they haven't really haven't skimped at all, and it looks like it's made of brass as well, which again is very impressive. Matching hands as well, they're all brushed to match the case, but all of these elements on the dial are all really nicely machined and nicely made as well. Just around the outside in this minute track, it's a bit of a pain to focus on. So we have made in Poland printed down here, which is a nice little touch, but also we have loomed inset dots, so it's almost a sort of sandwich dial. So the loom is on the two main hands in these hour dots as well, which is quite a nice, provides a nice visual aid in the dark. The loom is a little bit not the strongest, but it's reasonably good for the price of the watch. So it charges quite quickly. It has a fair amount of charge, but it's not the brightest in the world. Okay, so the strap, as you can see, is a nice deep oaky brown, and the underneath is a very nice natural finish to it. Same on this side with the logo stamped on it. We have one loose loop and one fixed loop, and a decent chunky solid brass buckle as well, which matches the case nicely. So one thing worth mentioning is that I have it on the smallest hole. So if you have a wrist smaller than mine, 7¼ inches, you probably will have to have an extra hole punched in, because obviously there's no smaller holes available. So it gives it a nice appearance on the wrist. This strap does. You can tell it's a decent quality leather. It's very supple, very soft, and really comfortable as well. And I think visually it matches everything perfectly. Okay, so let me get the macro lens on, and we'll have a look at it in much closer detail. So starting off with the dial, give it a quick wipe. So let's look at these applied elements. So there we can see that number 12, number 9. Let's go down to this number 6 as well. It's a bit bright in here, sorry. And there's a number 3. If I can get a fairly decent angle, you'll be able to see the depth of them as well. So you can see the depth of that one. Very thick, nicely glued on as well, no like splodges of glue around the outside. So here's that sort of texture in the middle, the logo printed directly on it. Then we have the brushed hands as well to match the applied elements. Second hand has a nice red tip. Interestingly as well, this very outside rim has some very light etching of the hour markers, which I've never seen before, which is a really nice touch, but it's so light you can barely notice it. You can see it's sort of like laser etched, but it was an interesting touch, and it's not on the bezel either. So when the bezel rotates, these are still stationary, so marking obviously where the minutes are. So there we go. Moving down here, we have this Made in Poland bit printed, and we have these inset loom filled hour markers. So moving on to the case. Here's the bezel insert, bezel grip, and then here's the case itself, brushed but developing some serious patina there. Move on to this side, we can see the side here. And then moving on to the crown. See there that some of the blue is still left on there. It's an absolute pain to get off, so that's a word of warning. Be prepared. So we have a stainless steel screw thread, so it doesn't get fused. Moving on to the case back. Here's the submarine image. Nicely detailed, nicely engraved as well, and then we've got these pieces of information surrounding it. Moving on to the strap then, see the very nice top of it. And then the underside. Where's the print on that side? And then the buckle. There's the real nice engraving on the buckle with the logo. Okay. So, for £285, I personally think it's a really nice watch. Obviously, the style is very specific. You have to like rustic looking watches. You have to be able to appreciate what brass does. Certainly do some research if it is interesting you and you haven't had a brass watch before, because you have to know what you're expecting. You will get some heavy patina pretty quickly, and if you don't like it, you'll have to keep it clean quite regularly. So if that's your jam and you really like the brass style and this kind of design, then I would highly recommend it. I mean, every G Gerlach I've ever reviewed, and that's about 4 or 5 now, they're always really solidly built and really impressively made for the price as well. So I would highly recommend it for the money, £285, and this is the G Gerlach Submarine, and that's what it's all about.